Right, so this paper was originally presented at Lesbian Lives at the beginning of March in Cork Island. The theme of the conference was solidarity. And when thinking about SAHRG's theme of borders, solidarity, I think, is often an act of breaking down barriers and borders for others for whom you may or may not share experiences with. As I'll discuss further, in the case of the analyst research community, several borders are being simultaneously contested. These include the historical blockades between lesbians and knowledge of our own cultural history, separation between the academy and independent researchers, and the relationship between the researcher and fan communities they're both researching and are a part of themselves. So to begin, in 2016, television director and screenwriter Sally Wainwright was awarded the Wellcome Trust Screenwriting Fellowship. Using some of the £30,000 from the fellowship, Wainwright financially supported the digitisation of Anne Lister's personal documents, which became publicly available via the West Yorkshire Archive Service in May 2019. In April of the same year, her television series Gentleman Jack premiered on screens in the UK and USA. This first season, presented from the perspective of the lesbian diarist and traveller Anne Lister, starts in 1832 and draws from both Lister's diaries and analysis provided by historian Jill Liddington and transcriber Anne Chomer. Lister's name will be familiar to many precisely because of the success of the TV show and the subsequent explosion of tourism in Lister's hometown, Halifax. So 2 months after the digitisation of the documents, when they became available, the West Yorkshire Archive Service transcription project began, and an international group of volunteers started transcribing Lister's diaries, which is around 7,722 pages and estimated to hold over 5 million words. For comparison, Samuel Pepys's diaries come in at about 1.25 million, and around a sixth of the overall content of Lister's diaries was penned in her crypt hand, a code she used to hide personal information. So this project, I will argue, ignited a new period in the production of knowledge on Anne Lister, starkly different from that in the last 135 years. So in the next 18-ish minutes, I will present the trajectory of the Anne Lister research community and how we've gone from the active suppression of a lesbian history to global celebration directly through acts of solidarity with lesbians and our history and within the lesbian community. So much of this stems from my own observations as a recent addition to the Anne Lister research community myself, and this paper is part of a new ongoing project studying the relationship contemporary lesbian and queer people have to Anne Lister. This is an early exploration into one particular group where this demographic is represented, and I hope you enjoy. So to structure this timeline of Anne Lister research, I refer to 3 specific periods: pre-1988, 1988 to 2019, and 2019 and beyond. My focus today is on the most recent period. However, I'll give a brief overview of the first 2 to contextualise the significance of our current understanding of Anne Lister. In covering the first period, pre-1988, I draw from Jill Liddington's 2010 edition of Presenting the Past, Anne Lister of Halifax, 1791 to 1840, and Helena Whitbread's introduction to the Secret Diaries of Miss Anne Lister from the same year. After her untimely death in 1840, Anne Lister's Welsh descendant, John Lister, was the first to read and publish extracts of Anne's diaries. He started doing so in the Halifax Guardian from May 1887 until October 1892. Liddington describes how Anne's friends and lovers, quote, remained distinctly shadowy in John's selections. However, after cracking Anne's code, John went against the advice of his friend Arthur Burrell and hid the diaries in Shibden Hall as opposed to destroying them. Unfortunately, this is far more likely to have been an act of self-preservation in a time of persecution of homosexuality, as is suggested by Jill Liddington, as opposed to an act of solidarity with lesbian history. So moving on to the 1930s, Muriel Green studied Lister's letters. However, in an interview with Jill Liddington in 1991, she described why she excluded any reference to Lister's love of other women, saying, quote, "It would have cast a slur on the good name of the Lister family if it were known." Indeed, even when she republished her work from the 30s as Miss Lister of Shibden Hall in 1992, questions were raised again as to why Green continued to be distinctly vague about Lister's lesbianism. So finally, in this period, we come to Phyllis Ramsden and Vivian Ingham, who worked on the diaries in the 1950s. Helena Whitbread describes a, quote, iron curtain of conspiracy around Anne Lister's sexual life at this time, wherein Ramsden and Ingham's intentions to publish were subject to the approval of Halifax Council's Libraries and Museums subcommittee. The committee referred to the coded parts of Lister's diaries as, quote, unsuitable material. Liddington considers this intentional suppression of new knowledge. However, whilst Ramsden didn't find the coded passages interesting or important enough to publish, Ingham encouraged future researchers to engage with the encoded passages and said that they could not be ignored. So though this initial period of Anne Lister research is resoundingly silent on a significant aspect of Lister's personal life, and particular passages were unfortunately actively suppressed, the contributions made by John Lister, Green, Ramsden and Ingham to our current understanding of Anne Lister are unquantifiable. It's also hardly surprising that in their time, when homosexuality was still criminalised in the UK, they made choices that kept them safe from persecution or personal sanction. Ultimately, the living have to come before the dead. So the next and following generations of researchers are only able to engage with Lister's history because of the work and the decisions made by those that came before us. So 1988 was a watershed year, I think, for research on Anne Lister, and stands in striking contrast to the previous period I've just described. So supply teacher Helena Whitbread's first book on Anne, The Secret Diaries of Miss Anne Lister, I Know My Own Heart, was also the first edition ever of Lister's diaries, which it not only included, but openly acknowledged Lister's love of other women. Incredibly, it was also published as Section 28 came into effect in the United Kingdom. This was government legislation which prohibited the, quote, promotion of homosexuality in all public life, including schools like the one where Whitbread was working at the time. So in an interview with Pat Esgate last year, Whitbread describes how on the 23rd of May, 1988, the day before Section 28 came into effect, she warned the headmaster of her school of the content of her soon-to-be published book. Whitbread knew the risk of not only her termination from her job and her current position, but the possibility that she would struggle to get further employment going forward. Thankfully, the headmaster was supportive, and Whitbread would go on to publish a second volume of the diaries in 1992, No Priest But Love, and she's currently writing a biography of Lister. So Helena Whitbread, a woman who doesn't identify as lesbian, she put herself on the line to share new knowledge pertaining to lesbian history. Her dedication to Anne Lister has subsequently inspired other lesbians and queer people to engage with and research the diarist, and opened her up to an even broader audience. To me, that's a notable act of solidarity, and one that she has maintained over the last 34 years. Whitbread's work has been considered as, quote, sparking a slow fuse for new research. Multiple researchers who published after Whitbread have cited her work as being their first contact with Anne Lister, including Anne Chomer, Jill Liddington, Alan Bray, and Jack Halberstam. However, aside from Whitbread, much of the research produced from 1988 to 2019 was written by researchers working within academic institutions and published in often expensive collections or behind paywalls. At this point, access to the diaries was also only available to those able to physically visit the Calderdale archive to read the microfilm. However, one significant publication at this time was Anne Chomer's 2019 book, Gentleman Jack, The Real Anne Lister, which was a companion book to the television series and the first biography of Lister available on the high street. So that brings us up to the present day, and where are we? So Jill Liddington identifies 1983 as the year when Lister's diaries became, quote, available for everyone, and the diaries were microfilmed by the archivist at the time. I would argue, however, that the path to absolute access really only began in the last 6 years. Wainwright's 2016 involvement in the digitization of the diaries was a catalyst for this, and the efforts of the code breakers mean anyone with access to a computer can engage with Lister's diaries unhindered by distance, limited archive appointments, and above all else, Lister's code and horrific handwriting. Between July 2019 and around October last year, the transcription project volunteers, known as the code breakers, they worked on producing full transcriptions of Anne Lister's diaries. All the diaries and travel journals have been transcribed and are in the process of being checked before publication by the archive's online database. To clarify, in less than 2 years, more than 5 million words have been transcribed by a group of approximately 120 people who did this in their spare time. As I started my PhD last autumn, I noticed that transcribed extracts of Lister's diaries were popping up all over the internet, particularly via Tumblr, WordPress, and other blogging platforms. I quickly discovered that various code breakers had begun sharing their transcriptions on their own websites in the interim between submission and publication via the archive. So the transcription project, which initially engaged with a pretty standard model of crowdsourcing for project output, recruiting volunteers via an open call for a project with set aims and a set conclusion, it's kind of exploded in this incredible way. So when the diaries were complete, the code breakers weren't just giving themselves a pat on the back for their phenomenal achievement, they kept going. So running parallel to the code breakers, uploading their own transcriptions online, some codebreakers, along with other independent researchers interested in ANLISTA, set up Pact with Potential on November 12, 2019. Pact with Potential is an English language website contributed to by international researchers, both independent and affiliated, though primarily independent. The website is a goldmine for anyone interested in Lister and others she crossed paths with, particularly her lovers Mariana Lawton and Anne Walker. There are currently 19 projects being worked on specifically about ANLISTA by Pact with Potential, including reference trackers that are constantly updated, of the books that she read, the wax seals that she owned and used for specific people, and her sexual escapades as well. Members of this group have also engaged in active research, producing open access articles on Lister's potential gravesite, which is still unknown, and highly detailed maps and timelines produced directly from engagement with Lister's travel journals and personal documents. I think the values that Pact with Potential have published in their guidelines on the website really reflect their dedication, not just to the pursuit of new knowledge production on Lister and her associates, but also to the burgeoning research community. The researchers heavily emphasise the intention to produce new work openly, collaboratively, and in support of one another. So other community research projects besides Pact with Potential include ANLISTA Italia, which is an Italian language website with similar aims to Pact with Potential, and In Search of Anne Walker, which aims to uncover more about Lister's last love. Notably, one of the researchers in this group, Diane Halford, discovered a journal penned by Walker in the Calderdale archive on the 20th of October 2020, uncovering a whole new perspective on Walker herself and Lister and their life together. So, as previously mentioned regarding Helena Whitbread, not every codebreaker or contributor to the online projects is a lesbian, though quite a lot of them are. There's no checking for a gay card to take part in these projects. When looking at projects and communities like this, however, it is important to look at where lines of solidarity are being drawn. In this case, there's the solidarity of those who aren't lesbians, adding to this body of work on a lesbian history. There's the solidarity of lesbians and other queer women working together. And lastly, there's the solidarity with those who can't access academic research because of a lack of institutional affiliation or personal funds. Of course, these few examples don't cover all the new research being produced on ANLISTA. However, these specific creators of open access knowledge and research have created the conditions for the future development of literature on Lister in a completely different context to previous generations of researchers. Before I go into further detail on this, I'll quickly draw your attention to how it's not only the production of new knowledge on Lister that's developed, but its dissemination as well. So the open access websites are a really important locale for dissemination. However, two events have been running for the last few years, which add a different dimension to the research itself and the relation of ANLISTA research to Gentleman Jack fans. So going back to the TV series. So one conference on Lister precedes the two mentioned. This is the ANLISTA conference in 2014. However, submissions were only open to graduate applicants, and I've struggled to find much information on what was presented there. Comparably, like their website, the Pact with Potential contributors who started the ANLISTA Research Summit in 2020 have made this free online conference open to all. I attended my first last October, and the content presented was produced and formatted very much in mind of those who had discovered Lister via Gentleman Jack and wanted to expand their knowledge. There was a pretty even split between papers presenting new research from independent researchers, 3 affiliated researchers with sessions on how to approach ANLISTA, organising your notes, utilising the archives and transcriptions, and suggestions on formatting to align with other people's work. Secondly, the inaugural ANLISTA Society meeting is taking place next month. However, whilst all bar one of the presenters is affiliated with an academic institution, the conference has been organised to be accessible to the wider public, with tickets for the conference made available through a local theatre in Halifax. This has also been organised to run during ANLISTA Birthday Week, which takes place to mark, as is in the name, the birthday of ANLISTA on the 3rd of April. This was inspired by the 2019 ANLISTA Weekend, hosted in Halifax by Calderdale Cultural Destinations and transformed by a group of ANLISTA enthusiasts from the travel and marketing professions. Both IT techs for ALBW are also code breakers, and I do think it is notable that every organiser for this event is a lesbian or queer woman. Also, in comparison to the researchers, most of the organisers of ALBW have identified that they learnt of ANLISTA via Gentleman Jack through various interviews. So thus we hear Thus, here we see the collaboration between ANLISTA researchers and fans of ANLISTA utilising their professional backgrounds to produce a space in which research is shared with the public alongside other educational events, author Q&As and film location tours. Watching the YouTube videos of ANLISTA Birthday Week from last year, which was held remotely, we can see a real emphasis given to the full complexities of ANLISTA's life, but Pat Esgate, who has spearheaded the event, has made the point of reiterating that this is about a lesbian individual from the 19th century. Long gone now are the days where Lista's coded passages are considered unsuitable for the public eye. Attendees and contributors have her expressions of love and admiration of women openly discussed and often laughed about in public talks, and several even bear them proudly as tattoos. So in drafting up this paper, I questioned whether I should have included a question mark in its title, so it would read the effects of andom. To call them simply fans carries a note of delegitimization a little bit. In his book, Fan Cultures, Matt Hill defines what he calls scholar fans and fan scholars, the former being academics who publish work on subjects they are fans of within their institutions, and the latter being fans who utilize academic research methods and writing styles for their personal outputs. The codebreakers and independent ANLISTA researchers don't neatly fit with either definition, I would argue. Oh, there's a fly. Whilst they may seem to fit the latter more closely, these researchers are not producing research on the object of fandom in this case, the ANLISTA of Gentleman Jack. As this project progresses, I'm interested in pursuing analysis of the fan communities at the intersection of ANLISTA, the historical figure, and the star image of Lister in Gentleman Jack, portrayed by Saran Jones. And from this, drawing from the work on fan cultural capital by John Fiske and hierarchies, in this case of knowledge, as theorized by Mark Jankovic. So in speaking with Steph Galway, a codebreaker and contributor to Pact with Potential, she identified the separation between the researchers' work on Lister and their appreciation for her portrayal in Gentleman Jack. She states that, quote, "The people working directly out of Anne's journals are much more than fans of the character from a TV show. They have a better picture of the real Anne Lister than anyone else." She continued to say, quote, "It's absolutely still possible to understand the real historical figure and also be a fan of the show." The perspective here is that fan behaviours may be enacted by Anne Lister researchers, both independent and affiliated. However, this is kept separate from their work on Anne Lister. Again, this is something I wish to delve further into, particularly when considering my own position as a fan of Lister and how that orientates me in my approach to this project, as does my identification with Lister's lesbianism. So where does this place future researchers of Anne Lister? New scholars now have completely unfettered access to Lister's diaries without edit. Codebreaker Marlene Oliveira, who I think is still here today, succinctly states, quote, "I don't need them," referring to previous researchers, "to tell me what Anne says. I can just go to the journal and read it all in context." Additionally, the resources available from the research projects mentioned are incredible starting points, and the contributors will point out gaps in the knowledge that need working on if asked. Drawing from my own experience, the emphasis on collaboration and communication has already begun to shape the way I produce outputs. During my first archive trip to the West Yorkshire Archive Service, Calderdale, in January, I transcribed the content of Anne's autograph book. My immediate response after typing up my pencil notes from the archive trip was to share this transcription with Pact with Potential, and this is under review at the moment. Additionally, as I said at the beginning, I'm recording this paper specifically to disseminate to members of the Anne Lister research community who can't be here because they're working, because of different time zones, etc. So to conclude, researchers, both affiliated and independent of Anne Lister, like myself, and those who come after me, are being introduced into a completely different context of knowledge production and dissemination that has been truly shaped by solidarity with lesbians in our history and between lesbians working together. At the end of presenting the past, Jill Eddington states the debt contemporary researchers have specifically to the dedicated efforts of Muriel Green, not just for her transcriptions and analysis, but her cataloguing and listing of Lister's documents. I feel much the same for all the researchers who've come before me, but particularly for the codebreakers and the contributors for Pact with Potential. I'm in constant awe of them, and I'm incredibly grateful to be pursuing my research within such a wonderful global community that doesn't just uncover history, but is making it too. And there are my references.